On March 15, 1995, three inseparable teenagers vanished without a trace in the depths of the most dangerous cave system in the United States. Ryan O'Connor, Jacob Martinez, and Kevin Morrison were experienced explorers, but that afternoon, something led them into forbidden tunnels no civilian had ever explored. When night fell and they didn't return home, the most intense search in Kentucky's history began. 5 months later, deep within the darkest sections of Mammoth Cave, rescuers made a discovery that shocked the entire nation. Kevin Morrison was found in a rocky crevice, his red shirt covered in dust and his flashlight abandoned at his side. But the questions that arose were even more disturbing than the discovery itself. How had Ryan and Jacob made it home that same night if the three of them had entered the cave together? What secret had they been keeping about those lost hours in the darkness for 30 years? The truth about what really happened in the depths of Mammoth Cave will finally be revealed, and it will change everything you thought you knew about friendship and survival. Make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this one, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. On March 15, 1995, in the small town of Mammoth Cave, Kentucky, three teenagers vanished without a trace. Kevin Morrison, 14, was celebrating his birthday in the most adventurous way possible by exploring the forbidden depths of the world's longest cave system. Alongside him were his best friends, Ryan O'Connor and Jacob Martinez, who had planned the perfect adventure to honor the young explorer. Kevin, with his signature worn-out red shirt and brown hair always falling into his eyes, had dreamed about this expedition for months. His bedroom walls were covered in maps of famous caves, and his obsession with underground exploration was well known around town. He lived with his grandmother, Mrs. Morrison, who worked double shifts at a local diner to support them after Kevin's parents died in a car accident when he was 9 years old. Ryan O'Connor, a freckled redhead, was the natural leader of the group. His bright orange shirt made him stand out in the forest vegetation surrounding the caves. With a smile that inspired confidence and a curiosity that often got him in trouble, Ryan had a talent for convincing his friends to follow him on any adventure. His parents, coal mine workers, expected him home by nightfall, but he knew exactly how long he could stay out without raising concern. Jacob Martinez, 15, was the brains of the trio. His family had moved from California the previous year when his father got a job at the local university. He always wore his favorite yellow shirt and carried a notebook where he recorded detailed observations about their explorations. Through his thick glasses, Jacob had studied the Mammoth Cave system maps meticulously, identifying sections not monitored by park rangers. The three boys shared a dangerous obsession case. They had explored every small rock formation near town but had never attempted something as serious as entering the restricted sections of Mammoth Cave. The system had over 300 miles of mapped tunnels, most protected as a national park, but rumors of secret entrances and unexplored passages had captured their youthful imaginations. The morning of Kevin's birthday was cold and cloudy. The three friends met at the edge of the forest surrounding the national park, each carrying a headlamp and basic exploration gear. Jacob had found references to an unofficial entrance in old geological records from the university where his father worked. The entrance was hidden behind dense foliage, nearly a mile from the main tourist trails. It was barely a fissure in the limestone, just wide enough for a slim teenager to pass through. Jacob consulted his notes while Ryan inspected the opening with his flashlight. Kevin, thrilled about his birthday adventure, was the first to suggest going in. The inside of the cave was unlike anything they had explored before. The tunnels branched off in many directions, forming a labyrinth of passages that descended into darkness. The walls were covered in calcite formations that glowed faintly under their headlamps. The echo of their footsteps created an eerie feeling that the space was much vaster than it appeared. Jacob took meticulous notes of every turn and fork, creating a rudimentary map he hoped would help them find their way back. Ryan led the group with his usual confidence, while Kevin, in his red shirt, explored every corner with fascination. Hours passed without them realizing, absorbed in the discovery of hidden chambers and unseen passages. As they went deeper, the tunnels became narrower and more complex. Rock formations created natural obstacles that required agility to overcome. At times, they had to crawl on their stomachs to get through particularly tight openings. The humidity increased, and the air grew denser as they descended into the mountain's depths. After about 3 hours of exploration, they reached a large chamber where several tunnels converged. In the center, a rock formation resembled a natural altar, surrounded by stalactites hanging like giant teeth. Ryan, always seeking a thrill, noticed an especially narrow opening in the eastern wall of the chamber. A tunnel was just wide enough for a person to squeeze through and sloped downward into darkness. Ryan shone his flashlight into the gap and declared it the perfect challenge for Kevin's birthday. Jacob, checking his notes, expressed concern about the stability of that section, but Ryan had already begun teasing his friends about being scared. The pressure of teenage group dynamics began to take hold. Ryan suggested that only a true explorer would dare enter such a narrow tunnel. Kevin, usually the most cautious, felt compelled to prove his bravery on his special day. Jacob tried to dissuade them, noting they lacked proper safety equipment and that the tunnel looked unstable. But the group momentum was already in motion. Ryan kept pushing with friendly taunts, suggesting Kevin could just explore the first part of the tunnel to show his courage. The temptation was too great for Kevin, who had dreamed for years of becoming a legendary explorer like the heroes in his AdventureBooks. Kevin approached the opening, his red shirt glowing under the lamplight. He took off his headlamp to squeeze more easily through the tight space, handing it to Jacob. Determined, he began crawling into the narrow tunnel, while his friends watched with a mix of admiration and growing unease. The last sounds they heard from Kevin were the scraping of his movement along the rock, followed by a chilling crack that echoed through the limestone walls. A deadly silence filled the cavern, broken only by the distant dripping of water. The crack turned into a deafening rumble that filled the chamber. Jacob and Ryan instinctively backed away from the entrance as rocks and sediment began falling from the tunnel ceiling. In seconds, the once passable opening became a solid wall of limestone and debris. Kevin was trapped inside. His muffled screams could barely be heard through the rubble, creating a sense of desperation Jacob and Ryan had never felt before. They immediately began trying to move the rocks with their hands, but quickly realized some of them were too heavy for 2 teenagers to lift. Jacob, with his analytical mind, assessed the situation in growing horror. The collapse hadn't been a simple accident. The tunnel's structure was inherently unstable, and Kevin's crawling had been the final trigger. The debris was packed in such a way that trying to remove the upper rocks could cause further collapse. Ryan, usually confident and assured, began to panic. His frantic attempts to move the stones only made the pile more unstable. Kevin's screams from inside grew weaker and soon turned into a silence even more terrifying than his cries. For hours, the 2 friends they found an alternate tunnel and began shouting for help, though they knew they were too deep underground for anyone to hear them. Jacob calculated that they would need specialized equipment and several adults to move the rocks safely. As the hours passed, the harsh reality of the situation began to sink into their adolescent minds. Kevin was trapped, possibly injured, and they had no way of helping him. Their headlamps began to weaken, and the possibility of becoming trapped themselves in the darkness became a real threat. As the lights started to fail and the reality of their situation became undeniable, Jacob and Ryan faced the hardest decision of their lives. They had been trying to rescue Kevin for over 6 hours and hadn't managed to move a single significant rock. The silence from within the collapsed tunnel was complete and ominous. Jacob, with his practical mind, was the first to voice the unthinkable. He argued that if they stayed any longer, they might become lost in the darkness or trap themselves. Their lights were nearly dead, and they had no way of contacting the outside world from such depth. Ryan, destroyed by guilt and desperation, initially refused the idea of abandoning his friend. However, the primal fear of being trapped underground eventually outweighed his loyalty. After hours of desperate and futile efforts, the two friends made the decision that would haunt them for the rest of their lives: to leave Kevin behind and seek help outside. The return journey was a nightmare of navigating in near darkness. Jacob had lost most of his notes in the panic, and they had to rely on memory to retrace their steps through the maze of tunnels. Their lights died completely halfway through, forcing them to feel their way forward along the damp cave walls. When they finally emerged into daylight, it was almost 9 p.m. They had been underground for over 10 hours, and the search for Kevin had already begun. The parents of the 3 boys had contacted the authorities when they didn't return home, and search teams were already combing the area around the national park. Ryan and Jacob arrived at the ranger station dirty, exhausted and traumatized. However, when faced with direct questions about where they had been and what had happened to Kevin, they made a decision that would change everything. They lied. They claimed they had separated from Kevin near the tourist trails and didn't. Know what had happened to him. The following days were a hell of interrogations, searches, and growing guilt. Jacob and Ryan were forced to stick to their false story as they watched families, rangers, and volunteers desperately search for Kevin in all the wrong places. The search teams focused on the main tourist trails and the accessible areas of the National Park. Ryan, normally outgoing and confident, became quiet and withdrawn. His guilt manifested in constant nightmares where he heard Kevin's screams echoing from the darkness. His parents, worried about his strange behavior, took him to a school counselor, but he couldn't reveal the truth without admitting that they had abandoned their best friend. Jacob, with his analytical mind, tortured himself with calculations about what they could have done differently. He realized that his knowledge of the secret entrance and the exact location of the collapse could have saved Kevin, but revealing it now would mean admitting they had lied for weeks while the family suffered. Kevin's grandmother, Mrs. Morrison, repeatedly visited the 2 boys, begging for any information that could help in the search. Her tearful eyes and motherly desperation were especially heartbreaking for Ryan, who had spent countless afternoons at Kevin's house. Treated like an adopted grandson. As the weeks passed, the official search began to scale down. Rangers had explored all accessible tunnels and tourist areas without finding any trace of Kevin. The prevailing theory was that he had fallen into a deep crevice or gotten lost in a remote section of the cave system. Ryan and Jacob kept their secret, but the weight of guilt began to affect their friendship. They avoided each other at school, and when forced to interact, their conversations were tense and full of unspoken accusations. Jacob began to blame Ryan for pressuring Kevin into the tunnel, while Ryan blamed Jacob for finding the secret entrance. In the first place, 5 months after Kevin's disappearance, on August 20th, 1995, a group of professional spelunkers conducting an independent geological study made a discovery that changed everything. While exploring the lesser-known sections of the cave system, they found the secret entrance Jacob had discovered in the university records. Dr. Sarah Chun, the leader of the team, immediately noticed signs that the entrance had been used recently. There were footprints in the sediment and evidence that teenagers had been in the area. Her team, equipped with professional tools and safety gear, decided to explore the tunnels to ensure there were no hazards for future visitors. When they reached the central chamber where the collapse had occurred, They found the debris that had trapped Kevin. Dr. Chun immediately recognized the signs of a recent collapse and evidence that someone had tried to move the rocks by hand. Her team began working carefully to remove the rubble, fearing what they might find. After several hours of meticulous effort, they found the body of Kevin Morrison. He was lying face down, most of his body wedged into the narrow rock fissure. His red shirt was covered in dust and sediment, and his worn blue jeans and sturdy hiking boots were clearly visible. Next to him, on the ground, rested his blue-banded headlamp, exactly where Jacob had left it 5 months earlier. Dr. Chun immediately contacted local authorities and the National Park Rangers. News of the discovery spread quickly through the small community, and soon Ryan and Jacob found out that their friend had been found. Both knew their lies were about to be exposed. The forensic investigators who examined the scene found clear evidence that Kevin had not been alone. There were multiple footprints, and the markings in the debris showed that at least 2 people had attempted to move the rocks. Kevin's headlamp had been carefully placed on the ground, suggesting someone else had been present when the collapse occurred. Detective Mark Thompson, an experienced county investigator, was assigned to the case. His first action was to re-interrogate Ryan and Jacob with the new evidence. Confronted with physical proof that they had been in the cave with Kevin, the 2 friends finally broke down and confessed the truth. The confession was devastating. Ryan admitted that he had pressured Kevin to enter the narrow tunnel as a test of bravery for his birthday. Jacob revealed that he had found the secret entrance in the university records and had led the group into the restricted sections of the cave system. Both confessed they had abandoned Kevin after the collapse and had lied for months while the family suffered. The impact on the community was immediate and profound. Mrs. Morrison, who had spent 5 months in agony not knowing the fate of her grandson, now had to face the reality that Kevin's best friends had left him behind in his most desperate moments. Her grief turned into understandable rage toward the 2 boys who had lied while she grieved. Ryan and Jacob's families were also devastated by their son's actions. The O'Connors, respected workers in the mining community, found themselves the target of criticism and resentment from neighbors. The Martinez family considered moving back to California to escape the shame and social ostracism. Authorities had to decide whether to press criminal charges against the 2 teenagers, aged 14 and 15, although technically they hadn't committed murder. Their decision to abandon Kevin and lie about the circumstances had prevented any chance of rescue and caused additional suffering to the family. The medical examiner determined that Kevin had died from asphyxiation and crush trauma within the first few hours after the collapse. This information was particularly devastating for Ryan and Jacob, who realized that even if they had sought help immediately, Kevin had likely died knowing that his best friends had chosen to save themselves instead of trying to save him. Case of Kevin Morrison became a symbol of the tragic consequences of peer pressure and adolescent cowardice. Regional media outlets extensively covered the story, focusing on how 2 best friends had abandoned a third in his most desperate moments. Ryan O'Connor was prosecuted as a juvenile for obstruction of justice and criminal negligence. His role as the instigator of the dare that led to Kevin's death was seen as particularly serious. He was sentenced to 2 years in a juvenile detention center, followed by 3 years of probation and 500 hours of community service and cave safety programs. Jacob Martinez faced similar charges, but his younger age and more reluctant role in the incident resulted in a lighter sentence. He received 1 year of probation, mandatory psychological therapy, and 300 hours of community service. His family eventually decided to move back to California, where Jacob was able to start over. Far from the notoriety of the case, Mrs. Morrison fought to keep her grandson's memory alive in a positive way. She established the Kevin Morrison Foundation for Cave Safety, which provided education about the dangers of unsupervised cave exploration. Her work helped prevent similar tragedies in other communities. The Mammoth Cave system implemented additional safety measures, including more frequent patrols of perimeter areas, and improved public education about the risks of unauthorized explorations. The secret entrance Jacob had discovered was permanently sealed to prevent future accidents. The two surviving friends carried the guilt for the rest of their lives. After serving his sentence, Ryan moved to another state and changed his name. Jacob became a safety engineer, dedicating his career to preventing industrial and environmental accidents. 30 years after the tragic event, Kevin Morrison's story continues to serve as a powerful lesson in responsibility, friendship, and the consequences of our decisions. The small town of Mammoth Cave, Kentucky, never fully forgot the three teenage explorers and the tragedy that tore them apart. In 2025, Dr. Sarah Chun, now director of the National Cave Safety Institute, published a comprehensive study on the Morrison case. Her research revealed that Kevin had survived for approximately 4 hours after the collapse, enough time for a rescue, had his friends sought help immediately instead of attempting the rescue themselves. Ryan O'Connor, now 44 and living, under the name Michael Stevens, finally broke his decades-long silence. In an exclusive interview, he described the weight of the guilt he had carried throughout his adult life. His testimony revealed additional details about Kevin's final moments, and the agony of the decision to abandon him got Jacob Martinez, now a respected safety engineer in California, established a scholarship program in Kevin's memory for students interested in geology and environmental safety. His work has saved countless lives through improved safety protocols in high-risk industries. Mrs. Morrison, who passed away in 2018 at age 89, was buried next to Kevin in the local cemetery. Her foundation continues to operate and has prevented over 50 similar accidents in cave systems across the country. The Kevin Morrison case became a standard case study in adolescent psychology and ethics programs. Universities use the story to teach about peer pressure, crisis decision-making, and the long-term consequences of deceit. The cave where Kevin died remains sealed, but a commemorative plaque at the entrance to the national park honors his memory and warns visitors of the dangers of unsupervised exploration. His story continues to educate new generations about the importance of honesty, responsibility, and the courage to ask for help when it is needed. 30 years after the tragedy that defined their lives, Ryan O'Connor made the most difficult decision of his existence, returning to Mammoth Cave for the first time since that fateful night in March 1995. Now living as Michael Stevens, a 44-year-old man with premature gray hair and deep wrinkles etched by decades of guilt. He had spent his adult life running from his past. The revelation he was about to make would shock not only the Morrison family, but the entire community that had followed the case for decades. In a 12-page handwritten letter sent to local media and the Kevin Morrison Foundation, Ryan revealed a secret he had kept even from Jacob all these years. Kevin Morrison had not died immediately after the collapse, as everyone believed. During the 6 hours Ryan and Jacob had tried to rescue him, Kevin had been conscious, speaking to them through the rubble. He talked about his dreams of becoming a famous explorer. He made them promise they would take care of his grandmother. And in his final conscious hours, he forgave them for not being able to save him. But the most devastating revelation was still to come. Kevin had managed to communicate the exact coordinates of an alternate passage, a side tunnel he had explored before the collapse that connected to the surface through a natural chimney. Ryan and Jacob had found this tunnel, but in their panic and desperation, they chose to use it to escape, rather than to find professional help. The confession revealed that Kevin had died knowing his best friends had chosen to save themselves instead of trying to rescue him. His last words, according to Ryan, were a plea that they tell his grandmother the truth and that they not carry the guilt for the rest of their lives. This final revelation completely changed public perception of the case. It was no longer just about two scared teenagers who made a mistake in a moment of panic. It was a conscious betrayal, deliberately hidden for 3 decades.